Welcome to Mindful with Minaa, where we explore how mindfulness can enhance your relationships and well-being. I'm your host, Minaa B, a licensed social worker, mental health educator, and author. Through insightful discussions, I will guide you towards self-awareness and self-efficacy, empowering you to effectively manage your relationships, reduce burnout, and be more present with yourself. So let's jump into today's episode. What's up, Mindful community? Welcome back to another episode. This is episode 22. And after today's episode goes live, I am going on a mid-season break. So I am going to be taking a month off so that I can rejuvenate and also work on building new episodes for you to tune into. So I am so excited to come back and dive into more topics, but also I'm excited to share that I am giving you an opportunity to write to me and let me know certain topics or certain things that you want me to explore. So in the description box, you are going to see a link to a Google form so that you can write me whatever questions that you have, and I will respond to your question in one of my upcoming episodes. Now, before I jump into today's episode, I also want to share that in November, I am hosting a retreat in Boone, North Carolina, and I am partnering with the Art of Living Retreat Center. And so I am so excited to have an opportunity to teach in person and give you the tools that you need to tap into self-discovery, but also to build healthy relationships. And so all of the stuff you hear me talk about, whether it's on my podcast or when I'm a guest on someone else's podcast, if you've read my book, all of the things that I teach about, I will now be able to teach in person. And so if you are interested in attending this retreat, please check the description box for all of the details. The retreat will be held from November 15th through 17th. It's a weekend retreat and it is going to be a very intimate space. So seats are limited because I want this to be a place where we can feel like we're building community. It's a safe, vulnerable environment where people can share, feel seen, and feel heard, but most importantly, cultivate a space of belonging so that we can connect with each other, but build tools so that we can connect with people when we leave the retreat. So if you have any questions for me, please feel free to shoot me an email. Otherwise, I hope to see you in November. So now that all of the announcements are out of the way, I want to jump into today's episode and talk to you about the importance of being a good communicator. I also want to share the things that I had to learn in my own relationships that helped me become a better communicator. When it comes to relational building, communication is the foundation. I can't know what you need if you don't express to me what you need. And people in my life are not going to know what I need unless I express to them what I need. And this is going to be a core part of today's conversation because I think a lot of us are very fearful to speak up and make requests and express when we're frustrated, express when we're annoyed, sad, angry, or when we're feeling like we're lacking something in our relationships. And so we choose silence because we think that that is the answer to the situation. But one of the things that I learned in my own experiences is that choosing not to speak up and be direct has always resulted in me feeling regret and resentment, and that is no one else's fault but my own. And so I had to really take a step back and figure out, one, why do I feel afraid to speak up? And I had to unpack some of my traumas. I had to unpack some past relational experiences where when I did speak up, I either was scolded or even unpacking my childhood trauma. But I also had to remember that I cannot move through life generalizing every individual I interact with. So, for example, if I feel like I can't have safe conversations with my mother, it is not fair to assume that I also cannot have safe conversations with my brother, sister, aunt, uncle. They're not my mom. And one of the things we do sometimes is we make generalizations, and I see this happening often, is when people will say, well, I treated this person this way because in the past I had certain experiences, but with someone else. And we have to stop projecting our past experiences with other people or onto people that we're trying to build a genuine, healthy connection with. It's not fair to that person. And so you're too afraid to speak up because you're thinking there's going to be a repercussion instead of allowing that person to show you who they are. You're making this assumption because of a past experience with someone else. And we have to learn how to use discernment and recognize when we are standing in our own way of our own relational healing with someone. Another thing could be we're assuming that things are going to be bad based off situations that happened with that person. And one of the things that we have to remember is that relationships are a choice. You get to choose who you want to be in a relationship with. There is a difference between being bonded to someone relationally by blood and then choosing to actually build out a relationship with that person. And so there are going to be people in your life that you can't choose that they're your family members. And you can't choose the fact that you share blood with them, you share the same last name with them. But you can choose how close you want to be with them. You can always decide if this is a relationship that you actually want to participate in and how far are you willing to go. And so, one of the things I want you to be thinking about is the ways that you can try to minimize the assumptions that you make of people. Because when we make assumptions, that gets in the way of our actions and it gets in the way of us being able to engage in healthy relational building because we're not giving that person an opportunity to show up and be who they want to be in that relationship. But when you also recognize that this person has a pattern of being a particular way, you have to ask yourself, what am I going to do with this person? How do I want to move forward with this person? What does it look like for me to be in a relationship with this person? Because if they have a pattern of maybe being passive aggressive or being rude or belittling you or being very judgmental, you have so much information about them already. And that can help you use discernment to say, what do I bring to this relationship if I know what I'm going to get in return? If I know what I'm getting in return is somebody who is passive aggressive, someone who is rude, judgmental, and there's a whole list of negative things that are very toxic and detrimental to my mental health, I have to ask myself, what am I going to invest in this relationship? And where are the boundaries? What rules do I need to put on them? And what boundaries do I need to set with myself? The boundary is not, I'm never going to communicate. The boundary has to be what I am expecting after I communicate. Because again, too often we will say, because I know how this person is going to react, I'm just not going to say anything. But still, who walks away feeling resentment? You do, because they're being who they have always been. So I need you to understand that when we are operating in relationships with people, we have to give people an opportunity to be themselves and show us who they are. And then when they do show us who they are, if we have a problem with their characteristics and their behaviors, the answer to dealing with that is to not swallow your words and be indirect. The answer to that is to learn how to be more direct, to communicate what your boundaries are, what your rules are, what your limits are, and then decide what does it look like for me to participate in a relationship with this person. Now, another lesson that I learned in my own personal journey that ties into the first point is that staying silent when I'm mistreated, but hoping the other person will read my mind and know they hurt me has never changed anything for the better in my life. I needed to communicate. I did not like when you did XYZ. I felt very uncomfortable when you did XYZ. I was hurt when you did XYZ. It has always been imperative for me to communicate how I feel about something in a relationship instead of hoping the other person would read my mind and figure it out on their own. Because 9 times out of 10, they never figured it out. And this is something I want you to be thinking about. I want you to be thinking about the amount of times you also experienced mistreatment. You stayed silent, assumed that if you did communicate, they would react a certain way, but then hoped that you would not have to communicate because you wanted them to recognize how they hurt you. And sometimes we don't realize that that in itself is an act of us being passive aggressive when we decide to stay silent and we're hoping that somebody will read our minds and do things differently instead of communicating to them what they need to do differently. I have a particular relationship in my life with someone who they have a whole host of traits that are a form of emotional immaturity. And so because they are emotionally disconnected, but also very selfish and I focused, meaning they're so emotionally immature, they only focus on how they're being treated. They play the victim. They can never see what they do wrong. I have been able to recognize that in this particular relationship with this person, I have to communicate because they are not doing the work to build their maturity to get to a level where they have the emotional intelligence to see things outside of themselves and recognize they are not the only person in this relational experience with feelings. Everything is not about them. And when you're dealing with someone who is emotionally immature, they're not doing the work of mind reading. They're just focused on their feelings. They're focused on how you made them feel, that you made them angry. Often they never really are doing the work to figure out what was the trigger here. Maybe I was wrong. They're not going to do that. They don't know how to take accountability. So basically, they are not doing the work that they need to do to even know how to read your mind or actually care enough to know what is going on with you because they are so self-focused. And this is why it is so imperative that we communicate, especially to the people with the toxic traits and tendencies. Because when we choose not to speak up, they move through the world assuming that they are right, assuming that they are the victim in this situation, and they are not doing the work to engage in the skills to recognize how they hurt you and how they can do better to repair the ruptures in the relationship. And so it is very important to communicate and let people know how they treat you. Let people know how they make you feel. Let people know when they make you angry and let people know how they can do better. What can they be doing better? Where are the areas where there are cracks in the relationship and you can say to them, this is how I can invest or this is how I have been investing and this is how I would like for you to invest. These are the things that I am hoping that you can change. And when you are not going to get the things that you want, and when you realize they can't give you the things that you're asking for, you have to ask yourself, so what are the boundaries that I am going to put in place? But at least at the root of that, I communicated my needs. I communicated the issues, and I did the work of trying to engage in repair. Now, this last point I think is really, really important because I know so many people who want to be nice, but they want to be nice to their own detriment. And so what I see some people doing sometimes is they feel uncomfortable about something or they want to express a need, but they recognize that that need might make the other person uncomfortable or it might disturb the balance of the relationship. And so what I have seen people do is decide, you know what, because this makes me uncomfortable, I'm just not going to make the request because I'm concerned that the other person might feel a particular way and I'm going to feel responsible for their feelings. And I truly, truly encourage you to learn how to break out of that habit. One core lesson I have learned in my journey of building healthy connections is that I cannot control how people feel. I can empathize with a person's feelings without feeling responsible for tending to their feelings. It is perfectly normal to acknowledge by me not doing certain things in my relationship, it might make you upset. but I am going to give you an opportunity in our relationship to work through that anger. Again, I can empathize with those emotions without putting myself in a predicament where I have to suffocate my own needs and engage in self-neglect and self-abandonment because you're uncomfortable and I'm telling myself I am responsible for your comfort. All human beings have emotions, and healing work is learning to give your body the tools that it needs to deal with uncomfortable emotions when they arise. When you're an adult, you're going to have to figure out how to work through hard things. And so one of the things I want you to use discernment around in your relationships is recognizing it is okay to have compassion for people. That is necessary. That is what helps relationships thrive. It is okay to have empathy for the things people feel. But at some point, you have to recognize when a line needs to be drawn, or else you're going to be engaging in self-neglect and self-abandonment to always make someone else happy while you live in a constant state of misery and unhappiness. So one of the things I want you to be thinking about is remembering that when we communicate and we make our requests and we ask people of things, discomfort is not synonymous with being unsafe. People are allowed to feel uncomfortable, and people have to do the work of regulating their nervous system to recognize, I feel uncomfortable right now in my body, but just because I feel uncomfortable, it does not mean I am unsafe in this moment. It does not mean I am unsafe in this relationship. Because when we feel unsafe, we're looking for safety, and sometimes we will make people feel as if they are the ones causing us harm. And harm is also not discomfort. So I need you to do the work of having discernment. I talked about this in a previous episode where I talk about how we need healthy judgment to move through life and recognize what decisions are wise and what decisions are unhealthy. And you need judgment in your relationships to be able to say, what is the thing that I'm willing to do and what is the thing that I am not willing to do? And I'm willing to do certain things because it moves me in the direction of repair. It moves me in the direction of us co-regulating together and healing together. But there are going to be times where I'm using judgment in this relationship to recognize, oh, this is something I cannot do. This is your work. It's not my work. This is something that you, on the other end, you're going to have to work through, and I am going to have to be a bystander. I am going to have to figure out how to support you through this, but I can't do the fixing. This is your work. And so I want you to remember that we have to communicate what we need, and we cannot control how people react to the things that we want. We have to give them permission to have feelings, but we also have to give them permission to work through their feelings. So I want you to be figuring out the things that you need to do to make communication better in all of your relationships, relationships with your family members, relationships with your partner, but also even in your friendships. Everywhere we move through life, we need to learn how to build healthy communication skills because that is the foundation of every relationship. And so how can you be working on changing the stories that you have in your head regarding what it means to communicate? Always remember that a relationship of any kind will not thrive without healthy communication. So what are some experiences that you had to face that helped you become a better communicator? And how can you apply that to all of your relationships moving forward? That's all for today's episode. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed what you just listened to, please take a moment to rate and review this podcast on your preferred platform. Also, don't forget to share it with a friend and on social media. To stay connected with me and my work, follow me on social media and subscribe to the Mindful with Minaa newsletter, which can be found on my website, www.minab.com. You can also continue learning from me by ordering my book, Owning Our Struggles, which is available at all major book retailers. Stay tuned for a new episode next week, and most importantly, remember to be present and stay mindful. Take care and goodbye for now.